And welcome, everybody, to a wonderful week right here on the Andrew Cooperrider Show. We'll be talking about some laws being considered, of course, in the legislature there in session. So, I'm going to be talking about those big bills coming out, talking about ones that have come out of committee, some good, some bad. If we have time, we'll talk about a little bit of this snow removal debacle that's going on around the state. Also, if we have some time, we will be discussing this group, Northern Kentucky against ICE and their amazing whistle kits, because it's very important to be blowing the whistle. As we know, in Kentucky, we've had gigantic ICE operations that have, need people to defend them. We haven't, so we'll talk about what the truth is there. So we'll have all that and more today on the Andrew Cooperrider Show. If you're listening to this on the radio or watching this on TV, I want to encourage you, please head over to theandrewshow.com. Once again, that's theandrewshow.com. You can see all the great places where you can listen to, watch the Andrew Cooperrider Show in case you miss an episode. So, fantastic, I know. But without further ado, let's get down into it. So, you've probably heard this story before, but I want to make sure you're aware of this story before I talk about this next bill here that just came out of Senate Committee, Senate Bill 122, Senate Bill 122. Just cleared Senate Committee. It's headed to the floor for a vote. By the time you're listening to this, it may have already hit the floor. They may have pulled it back, because some people, including myself, have raised issues with it. But before I explain why I have such a problem with that bill, let me tell you this story here, a story you all know about Ronald Exantus. This was a major news story covered in the interim between sessions. It's brought up the Logan law bill that is going to end up getting passed this session. I believe it's out of committee. I believe it may have passed the House already. I don't know. But most likely it's going to pass because of this giant outrage. And it involves Ronald Exantus, who broke into a home in Versailles and he fatally stabbed a 6-year-old, Logan, hence why it's called Logan's Law, while he slept, and then assaulted other family members. The father, they got into a tussle. The father held him waiting for police to show up. Now, he was acquitted by murder by reason of insanity. But at the same time, he was convicted of the assault charges. I don't know how that works. That's a problem within the justice system itself, that you can commit crimes at essentially the same time, but one you can be acquitted of by reason of insanity. The other, though, you're found guilty of. That doesn't make much sense. I know that went up to the Supreme Court. They were kind of like, this doesn't make a lot of sense. But anyways, so he was convicted, though, of assault charges, 2nd and 4th degree, and sentenced to 20 years. But here's the thing. It was deemed, because of the way our laws work, 2nd and 4th degree assault charges were deemed non-violent for parole purposes. That's right. You can get into a physical altercation. You can invade somebody's home, kill their 6-year-old, and get into a tussle match with the father of that 6-year-old who's holding you for police, and that assaulting of the father, the attack on the father. So break into a home, attack somebody, but yet it's considered a non-violent felony in Kentucky. Now, the fact it was considered non-violent meant for parole purposes, he may have received a 20-year sentence, but he was released early this year. He's back in jail now for, I believe, parole violation. But due to he had good behavior credits and a mandatory re-improvised supervised release, despite the fact the parole board, nobody wanted to release this guy, but the law said he had to be released. And so the Logan law is attempting to change that, also address this whole, reason of insanity situation. And I tell you that because I want you to be aware that his acts were classified technically as nonviolent. And I want you to keep that in mind as I tell you about this bill that just passed Senate Committee, SB 122. And it says that people convicted of non-violent felonies now, so already judges have some leeway in this, but it would formalize and put into law that people convicted of non-violent felonies can submit a petition to the judge that they consider the fact that they're parents when it comes to sentencing. That's right. So if you're the parent of a child and you commit what they call a nonviolent felony, we just went over some of the things Kentucky considers nonviolent felonies. I'll list off some more here in a second. That all needs to be cleaned up, of course. But regardless, if for an example, let's take something that you would say maybe you wouldn't think of a violent felony. A lot of times when people say nonviolent felonies, they're talking about drug charges, right? But a adult without children and adult with children commit the same crime, but because the adult has children, that should be considered in sentencing, and maybe they get a supervised release while the other adult would have to go to jail. Now, granted, this means you're not getting equal treatment under the law. In fact, you'd expect a bunch of Republicans, instead of trying to codify this into law, that the judge has to consider the fact they're a parent, we'd be saying the opposite. We'd be saying, as Republicans who are supposed to believe in law and order, that look, if you commit a crime and someone else commits a crime, you should get the same punishment. Now, that's not the way it's been here in Kentucky. For an example, if I commit robbery or theft, let's say, and steal something from you, and somebody else steals something from you, and we steal something worth the same amount, a couple grand, let's say, but the person who stole from you, in one case, had drugs in their pocket, and the other person just stole from you, but they're not a drug addict, that person with drugs in their pocket now can qualify for drug courts, which instead of sending people to jail, they send them through rehabilitation, because, of course, they only committed that crime because they were on drugs. That's what they want you to think. Now, you can call me crazy, you can call me extreme, but I believe that the justice system is first and foremost about justice for the victims of crimes, justice under the law. And then if a person commits a crime, regardless of their age, their race, their gender, regardless of anything besides maybe considering the fact, is this their first offense or fifth offense? Because, now you're establishing a history that there's no way you can possibly become an active member of society. Outside of maybe considering criminal history, a person who commits breaks a law and another person breaks a law should receive the same punishment. But instead, people have got it into their mind that our justice system needs to be about rehabilitation. And while rehabilitation is an important part, it's not supposed to be a part of the justice system. The justice system is about the victims. And I find it particularly egregious when we start codifying this idea that two people can commit the same crime but be treated differently because they're the parent of a child. If anything, you would think the person who committed the crime that has children has committed a more severe act. At least I do. Because not only are you committing a crime and victimizing the victim, whoever you committed the crime against, but also you've now victimized your children. If anything, what people would call victimless crimes, like drug crimes, actually become quite clearly victim crimes when the person committing them is the parent of children, because you're victimizing the children of that parent. That parent is victimizing their own children because they're either absent, spending money on drugs, not taking as good a care of kids as they could because they're on drugs. This so-called victimless crime of drug use suddenly does become obviously a victim's crime when you start considering kids. But instead, what the Republicans in the Senate currently want to do, based upon what they passed out of committee, and Democrats, of course, voted for it as well, is turn around and give them more lenient sentences. Here's some other examples of quote-unquote nonviolent felonies in Kentucky. Second-degree assault. Examples include stabbing someone, causing serious injury but not intending death, beating someone severely with an object, or shooting/attacking in a way that doesn't qualify as first degree. This is called nonviolent felony. Strangulation, nonviolent felony. Assault under extreme emotional disturbance, considered a nonviolent felony. If the Republicans have their way, if they're a parent of a child and they assault you, they could get less of a sentence. Obviously, Senate Bill 122 is a problem. Everybody should be encouraging their representative to vote no. When we come back, we'll be discussing some other bills, Bashir's travel, as well as I will lay out, too, how you can contact your legislator. We'll have that when we get back here on the Andrew Cooperrider Show. Delicious. Oh, what's in here? Oh, well, what's in my tumbler here, the Andrew Cooperrider Show tumbler, available for sale at brewed.store, is 1776, a brewed coffee, a Kentucky proud product that's roasted right here in Kentucky, of course. You can pick yourself up a bag at brewed.store. Free shipping on orders over $85. And they're sold in per pound, both ground, whole bean, and K-cups. If you like your little K-cup machines, we have that for you too. And the best part is per pound, it's cheaper than most of the boutique freedom-loving coffees out there. And this one's made right here in your own backyard. I know that's fantastic. So pick yourself up. We've got 1776, a French roasted dark blend, which is historically funny because, of course, the French financed the revolution. And then also we have one of our other signature blends, Tyrant's Tears, a coffee that we meticulously harvest from famous tyrants like Annie Bashir, Pol Pot, and, of course, Mao. Additionally, we have other single origin coffees such as Cameroon Pea Berry, Kenya, Peru. Fantastic, fantastic blends. Go ahead and pick yourself up a bag today. Not only will you be supporting the show, but also you'll be putting in your mouth a delicious and tasty black nectar called coffee. So order yours today. Brewed.store. Once again, it's BREWED.store. Brewed.store. Free shipping. Orders over $85. Pick yourself up a bag and pick yourself up one of these spiffy tumblers. Andrew Cooperrider Show tumbler today. Once again, that's brewed.store. And you're back here on the Andrew Cooperrider Show. I'm talking about some bills working their way through the legislature, some good, some bad. Maybe you want to weigh in on that, though. Maybe you want to be able to reach out to a representative and say, hey, look, this is how I feel. Well, you don't even have to know who your state senator and state house rep are, though it'd be helpful if you did, not for the calling in purposes, but actually just because, you know, you should know those things. And I'm sure most of you listen to this that follow state politics. That's why you're listening to it, are among the type to sit there and know who their state house rep and state senator are. But how do you reach out? How do you reach them? Well, first, you can always email them. You go to LRC's website. That's a Legislative Research Commission's website, and you can navigate to your legislator. If you don't know who it is, they do have a handy tool you can use called Find My Legislator, where you put in your address and you discover who your representative or state senator are, and then you can email them at their email address. When you email them, please let them know you are a constituent. It's best if you say, look, I disagree with this bill. Here's why. I encourage you to vote no. Don't email them up making all kinds of threats and claims, especially if you can't back it up. And what I mean by that, backing it up, is that if you can't or are unable, like for example, you threaten to run them out of office, but you don't even plan to knock doors against them, maybe don't threaten that. You can also make a phone call, though. You can call 1-800-372-7181. Once again, that is 1-800-372-7181. That's a legislative message line. You can call up there and tell them who you want to leave a message to. You can say, I want to leave a message to my state senator regarding Senate Bill 122. They'll ask you for your address. You can leave a message for both you and your spouse if you live in the same home. And you can go ahead and leave a message on behalf of both of you or just you, telling your state senator, hey, look, I don't agree with this. Please vote against it. So if you disagree with Senate Bill 122, the bill I was just talking about that requires judges to consider parental status when it comes to sentencing, giving preferential treatment to parents over anybody else who commits the same crime that's labeled as nonviolent. And I went over how many things we normal people would consider very violent is considered nonviolent. Well, you can voice those concerns on bills. Any bills I'm talking about here, 1-800-372-7181. 7181. It's important for you to be able to make your voice heard. Here's some other interesting legislative news. The Kentucky legislature went ahead and dropped their budget bill, and it looks a whole lot different than what they normally drop. So when you normally see the budget bill come out, it has already worked out a lot of the earmarking that needs to go on. So the way this works is there's a base in the budget, and it is coming out, and I don't know if everybody will understand how important it is to get this, but it's coming out and being very publicly said in a lot of situations that, I know that a lot of legislators, like 10 legislators, have told me that this is what's being said by leadership, is that they don't actually know what's in the quote-unquote base. So they have this pot of money that they appropriate and put aside for each department. So let's say Cabinet for Health and Family Services, they put aside, $400 million, and that's considered the base budget. That's to pay the salaries, the leases, all the things that they're statutorily required to do. And then any extra programs that aren't currently required or that they want funding for, that is added in addition in the budget and is earmarked for it. And those requests for what's in the budget is called ABRs, additional budget requests, and they can come from the executive branch can submit ABRs to request extra funding for special programs. Like Bashir wants, of course, pre-K for all, so he'll submit an ABR for that. Or it can also come from legislators. It is also interesting when it comes from legislators that who actually requested what spending in the budget is not public record. That should probably be changed, but that is how it is now. And by public record, I mean literally only the budget committee knows. Like another legislator can't even find out. If you ever ask your legislator about like money in a bill and you're like, why did we spend money on this? Who asked for it? And they're like, somebody in the caucus wanted it. One of the Republicans asked for it. One of the legislators asked for it. And then you ask them who, and they're like, I don't know. They literally don't know. Like there's only a few legislators that know who actually asked for what spending. I find that pretty egregious personally. But the other part about this that's pretty shocking is going back to that base budget. So they just have to give them $300 million to cover what they're statutorily required to do right now, their salaries, their leases, et cetera, et cetera. That base budget has constantly crept up. And if we're trying to make real cuts, you have to go in to this base budget and find the fat, find the waste, find the fraud, find the abuse, find the places where we've got 20 people doing a job that could be done by 5 people. Those are the types of cuts that have to be found if you really want to cut down with the state spending. The problem is that it is not entirely clear, apparently, what's in that budget. To say it in another way, the legislature, due to whether you want to call it poor record keeping, purposely obfuscating things, whatever you want to call it, but the legislature is pretty publicly saying, and like I said, I've had like 10, 15 legislators tell me this, that they don't know what we spend our money on in those pots. They don't actually know how much is going to what. And that's like a big problem. And when you sit there and say, well, what do you mean they don't know? They just need to study the documents. They literally, the documents like don't exist, apparently. There's some talk about different ways to analyze the budget, and it's like, look, we don't have the inputs to be able to comb through the budget properly. And that's a big problem, and they're like I said, they're very publicly talking about it, so I hope that means they're planning on making a fix on this, because they have to kind of better do it now. Because the problem, I want them to get a control on our spending, right? And this budget that they put forward, by the way, and I'll dig into it, does communicate an idea that they do want to cut spending and they want to figure out what we're spending our money on. But this problem of not knowing where our dollars are exactly going, if you're going to solve it, you have to solve it now. Because it becomes less politically tenable, just facts of the matter. When you have a Republican governor, because when you have a Republican governor, a Republican lieutenant governor, a Republican attorney general, a Republican ag commissioner, a Republican auditor, a Republican treasurer, a Republican secretary of state, which we'll probably have after this next constitutional office election here in a few years. It becomes a lot more politically untenable to come out and say, we have no idea what the executive budget spends their money on. Not a clue. So if you're actually wanting to answer that question, politically speaking, you're going to do it now. And I hope they do. And like I said, this budget they put forward is sending a message that we do want to cut spending, because when I say what they put forward was a very bare bones budget, it just has like the base in it. What they quote unquote have to give to these departments. I mean, it'd be nice to see them across the board just cut funding, just say, every department's getting 5% cut. You guys figure out where to cut it from. The concern, of course, is how politically tenable is it? Do they end up, because here's a concern, right? And I know people are sitting there like, why not just say that? Here's the problem. If you don't know what's in it and you can't instruct the governor what to cut, what this trash governor will do to get a political win in order to attack Republicans, in order to help out his party, if the Republicans just come in and say, cut 5% across the board, do it however you want, without telling him specifically what Beshear will cut, will be the things that create huge headlines. And he'll say, look how mean the Republicans are. They made me cut this. Look how awful these Republicans are. We can't keep them in leadership. They're cutting these essential. They're cutting the senior meals program. They're cutting this child dentistry. They're cutting this or that. And he will cut whatever is politically most advantageous. He's not a good person. He's not going to cut the things we can actually go without and show he's responsible at making a budget. No, he'll do anything he can to embarrass the Republicans because he's trash. Because as he sits up there and says, this issue isn't red or blue, this isn't Republican or Democrat, this is bipartisan. He's the most partisan person there is, and all he cares about right now running for president is those headlines. You cannot trust him to cut the proper things that actually that create real budget change into the future of cutting spending. So they have to get a handle on exactly what's in there in order to figure out what to cut, and I hope they do so. But part of that, like I said, is that they put out this bare bones budget with no ABRs in it, basically none, where any earmarked funds are not set aside. And then what Representative Petrie, who's chair of the budget committee, came out and said was, look, all these subcommittees on the budget, and they have tons of them, all the subcommittees on the budget and the budget committee are going to be doing a lot of work over this session, because every time you want to add something to this budget, we're going to have a public hearing about it. We're going to have a committee hearing about it. There's going to have to be some decisions made. So that way it's very publicly out there what we're spending money on, what's been requested, what's been argued. So that way, when they don't fund something, it doesn't leave this, once again, trash governor to sit there and say, look what they didn't fund. Instead, they can point to it and say, look, this was the hearing. This is what they wanted the money for. And it was a waste. I believe that's the direction they're trying to go in, because once again, they need to cut like $1 billion. If they want to get the other 0.5% income tax cut, if they want to get to 0% income tax, they're going to have to cut spending. And we go through it all the time on the show, where all the waste, fraud, and abuse is, the millions of dollars being spent here and there and everywhere. Money, if you remember, there was an issue with funding on Meals on Wheels program, and Beshear just magically found $10 million somewhere to keep funding it. $10 million just found. So yeah, we should know, because we'll continue to appropriate those funds and spend it on these useless things. Coming up after this, we'll talk about some good bills, bad bills moving through, bills I support. And then we'll also be discussing, we'll probably get to, of course, the snow removal debacle that's going on, both Lexington, all across the state. Kentucky Highway Transportation has a little bit of a fiasco going on. So we'll talk about all that and more here when we get back. Do you hear that? I do. It's Beshear crying. Why? Because you're listening to the Andrew Cooperrider Show. And I thought to myself, why should we let those tears go to waste? Like any good capitalist, I said, that is a resource that can be sold. So we capture those tears from Andy Beshear and other famous tyrants. like Pol Pot, Mao, whoever else. And we collect them up and we put them into a delicious coffee called Tyrant's Tears, available at brood.store. Once again, that's brood.store. You can pick yourself up a spiffy Andrew Cooperrider Show tumbler while you're at it and get yourself a nice bag. Free shipping on orders over $85. We have Tyrant's Tears in 1776, our signature blends. We also have flavored coffees such as Swiss chocolate and bourbon for those of you that want a little kick without the buzz from, well, alcohol. You'll get the buzz from the caffeine, though. Check out today. Brood.store. This is a Kentucky Proud product, roasted right in your own backyard. Brood.store. Support the show. It's cheaper per pound than most of those other boutique coffees. And it's available whole bean, ground, K-Cups. However you make your coffee, we got you covered. And you're back here on the Andrew Cooperrider Show. So there are a few bills I do support. I know I talked early on about Senate Bill 122 that I don't support. There's a few bills that I do support. One of them that's working its way through is House Bill 189, which bans sitting, standing, or loitering in state highways right-of-ways not meant for pedestrians, such as medians, grassy strips, shoulders, etc. Now, the bill does include exemptions for emergencies, vehicle breakdowns, cops, utility workers. Local governments can also allow limited exemptions. So, you know, while I don't agree with some of these local charities that literally are in the roadways, I know the fire departments do like this boot thing that just seems extremely dangerous. In Lexington, they'll do this thing where they put cones down, like on Man of War. They'll put these cones down and have firemen like walking through the traffic. It just seems, if you've ever seen this, it seems, one, extremely dangerous. Two, it causes traffic issues. Like, there's got to be a better way. But anyways, putting that to the side, it would still technically allow those things if a local government decided to vote to allow it. However, putting that to the side, what this is aiming to deal with is this epidemic of panhandling going on. Now, a lot of people sit here and say, look, you know, if somebody wants to freely give money to a panhandler, you know, that's the freedom, that's their choice. And that the panhandler has a right to free speech, to stand there with their, you know, signs out. And that's free speech. The Supreme Court has ruled that's free speech. They have a right to do so, to hold a sign out asking for money, and people have a right to give them money. And while I don't disagree per se with that, what I do disagree with is this idea that these there is safety concerns here. I mean, especially some of these areas where I see some of these panhandlers, they're very close to the roads. You don't want anybody getting hit. You don't want somebody to accidentally hit them with their car. That person ends up having to deal with insurance and all these other things and ends up, you know, being in an untenable position, raising the cost of them being at blame for somebody doing something that's extremely unsafe. But also, let us keep in mind that we're talking about public areas that should be safe for all of us to use. And it's just not, because these vagrants litter. We have to clean that up, dispose of dangerous things. I mean, you shouldn't have to, when you need to change a tire on your car on the roadway, you shouldn't have to double check to make sure you're not going to lay in some needles. But currently you do. I remember this was a couple of years ago. I hit a deer with my truck. And I was on the highway between the two Frankfurt exits, and it was almost to the bridge where there starts to be high rock walls. I remember it was like 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and this deer just came out of nowhere, was running all across, had nowhere to go. I'm like, what is this deer doing here? Where did it come from? How did it get here? So I hit this deer, and so I pull over to the side of the road. I get out of my truck. I walk up to the deer. Deer's dead. Right? And I'm walking back and I look down. And I'm literally basically middle of the highway, not middle of the highway, I'm on the shoulder, but as far as, like, I'm basically nowhere where nobody should be. And I look down and there's like 4 needles on the ground. And I'm like, did they pull over and do drugs? Throw them out the window? Did they just throw them out the window while they were driving? What's going on here? But regardless, you shouldn't have to worry about that on public areas. You pay for them. I pay for them. We shouldn't have to be paying for litter control for these people. We shouldn't have to do that. They are abusing these public areas that our tax dollars pay for. And understand the cause for liberty, of course. I'm a liberty-leading guy. Everybody knows that. But what liberty and what freedom is it that my tax dollars have to continually be doled out to clean up after these people? And here's the other thing when it comes to the drug side of thing, right? I don't think anybody wants hard drugs in their community, at least normal people don't. And so the idea here being is that if it's not easy to panhandle in this state, if it's not easy to stand on the roadway and ask people for money, if they are, quote unquote, homeless, and a lot of people say, well, they're homeless, you should care about that. They're homeless by choice. Let me tell you another story. This happened literally like last week. I was sitting in a parking lot in Lexington. I was on the phone with somebody preparing to go in somewhere. And while I'm on the phone, this clearly drugged out woman, she's probably in her 30s-ish, I don't know. You know, you got to adjust there. It's hard to, for all we know, she's 20 years old, looks like she's 40. Anyways, stands like near my window. I'm on the phone. I just ignore her, not talking to her. And she persists on like standing in front, waving. And so I told the person I was on the phone with, I said, hold on. And I rolled down the window. I said, what? And she proceeds to tell me a story about how she's cold and wants some money because she wants to be able to go in somewhere to get warm. But, you know, if you want to go in somewhere and get warm, you have to normally buy something. You got to pay for something. And so she needs money to pay for something so she could get somewhere warm. I say, oh, you want to warm up? Well, let me do this for you. Let me call the warming centers, see who's got space, and I'll arrange to get you there. You know, if I got to call an Uber to come get you and take you there, I'll do that. If I've got to, you know, call them and ask them to provide transport, if they may do that, right? We'll figure it out. We'll get you there, though. She wasn't interested in that. She said, well, no, I called around to all the warming centers. They won't take me because I have a pet. You're homeless, supposedly? You supposedly have nowhere to warm up at? But you have a pet? Never mind the fact that she's walking around without this pet. Where's the pet at? You can't even home yourself. Why are you homing a dog or cat or whatever pet you supposedly have? Now, she wanted money for drugs. Now, if you're the kind of person that gives them money and you think it's a good idea, I challenge you to rethink that because you might be killing them. That dollar you give them might be the dollar they use to buy the drugs they OD on. You're not helping, you're enabling. So no, if I see these people and they want help, if they really want help, there's help out there. There's tons of people that would help these people like crazy. And I post about this online. A lot of the comments were like, well, she had a pet. That's reasonable. I'm like, that's not reasonable at all. What's wrong with you? They're like, maybe that's the only thing she's got left is a pet. You can't take care of it. That should be animal cruelty. But regardless, I personally believe that House Bill 189, which bans the sitting and standing, is taking aim at the panhandling, is a good bill. They can't easily panhandle here. They might move along to somewhere else where it's easier. Some people are like, oh, make it somebody else's problem? Yeah. If it's not the state's problem, the state doesn't have to pay for it. It's not your local government's problem. The local government doesn't have to pay for it. There is so many programs out there for these people. People are like, oh, maybe you should be worrying about solving the problem of their homelessness. You can't solve, unless you're willing to literally lock them up in a rehab facility and demand they never leave and take away those civil rights, which people would cry about. You can't fix it. And even after you do, you can't fix the fact that if they get out and they start using again, what are you going to do? What's your solution? Well, you just need to give them somewhere to live. No, that's not actually a solution. They've tried it. If it's as easy as if you just gave a home to every homeless person, then they wouldn't be homeless anymore. Nope, they wreck them, they destroy them, they choose not to live in them. Litany of reasons. But anyway, so I support House Bill 189. You should too. Also, right now, we have a bill working its way through to deal with grooming. That's right, dealing with grooming. Right now in Kentucky, there's no official grooming law. So if a teacher decides or any authority figure decides that they're going to show some 14-year-old girl special attention. This really happened in some schools. A high school teacher, male most of the time, will show special attention to some girls. And then the minute they turn 18, they will engage in relations with them. And there is no law in the books that makes it illegal. This has been confirmed to have happened, and there's nothing the police can do about it. So this bill, House Bill 4, has passed through committee. It's going to the House. It should be supported. There's a few little changes that should probably be made to it just to clear up some of the definitions of grooming, in my humble opinion. But overall, it's a pretty good bill as it sits. I know there's been some amendments filed that just clear up those little things. Those should be supported as well. But yes, we need this law on the books. Well, coming up, we'll be discussing some of this ICE, both ICE removal and ICE in Kentucky. We'll have that here in a few short minutes. And you're back here on this final segment of the Andrew Cooperrider Show. So, ICE on our roadways, snow on our roadways, and our roads mostly suck. It seems like they literally gave up. After like 2-3 days, it's been clear now for days. It hasn't snowed. It hasn't rained. It's been clear for days, and they just gave up. In fact, it's funny, Lexington put out this little graphic where they're trying to explain why they're not salting anything to get rid of the ice. Basically, they're like, the salt doesn't even work right now, supposedly, which is incorrect. That's not how salt works. It will work. It may take a little bit longer. You don't even necessarily have to put down more, but especially as there's sunlight hitting the pavement, even if it's 20 degrees outside or 15 degrees, because they put out this graphic claiming when people are like, why aren't you putting out salt? Why aren't you dealing with the ice? And they're like, well, we can't. You just have to like deal with it. Now, for those of you unaware, up until the age of like 16, I lived in the snow belt. I lived in a place where we would have feet of snow on the ground at a time. And what I can tell you, living there, where we dealt with snow constantly, this that you're seeing of just snow and ice everywhere without being dealt with at all didn't happen. If it didn't snow for several days, it was cleared up. In fact, if we wanted to have no school, if I wanted a snow day as a kid growing up, there had to be like, it had to have a foot of snow fall perfectly between like midnight and 6 a.m. And if that didn't happen, we had school. They had the ice cleared. They had the snow cleared. It was ready. It was good. The roads were good. They fixed it. So it's got nothing to do with the temperature. Don't buy that. That's not true. That's not how it works. It's not how snow removal works. Just trust me. It's just not it. They're lying to you. And why are they lying? Well, one reason is because they're wasting so much money. Take, for example, Lexington. They're wasting so much money on things like spending, to remind you guys, close to $1 million on these silver balls. Remind you, this was an art installation they put in place that was supposed to be like some monument to Lexington's 250 years or something like that. And they spent like near $1 million on this. But what they didn't spend a lot of money on is preparing once again. I mean, we've like a snowstorm every year. We have an ice storm every year. They didn't prepare to actually be dealing with what we're dealing with here. And I believe they did not buy enough salt. And they're covering it up by pretending salt doesn't work. Hoping you all don't research on your own how salt works. Don't talk to somebody who's from an area that deals with a lot of snow and salt and sees it, dealt with it, and can inform you that they're lying to you, but they are. But also, you have this too happening in the Kentucky Highway Transportation Cabinet. This is happening down in Hopkinsville. It's really kind of fascinating overall. This story is fascinating to me. So, there's been questions about this at an executive committee hearing or executive fiscal court hearing in Hopkinsville, Christian County, I believe, meeting where they were asking questions to the area supervisor about why the roads suck so much. And one of the things that came about was this screenshot from a private group where the supervisor was rewarding one of the branches, the areas that they're over, for using the least amount of salt. And so therefore, she was going to buy them a barbecue lunch, cater a lunch for them for using the least amount of salt. So if the Kentucky Highway Transportation Cabinet incentivizing road crews to use the least amount of salt possible. Now, the defense for this has been issued to say, well, no, we're talking about, slinging salt unnecessarily into ditches or other things and not actually hitting the road. That's what we're actually trying to talk about and deal with. We're not trying to incentivize them to use less salt. But if you run a contest with a reward to a road crew saying the group that uses the least amount of salt gets a reward, are you incentivizing them to properly salt the roads, or are you incentivizing them to cut the most amount of corners possible? It may seem small. You're like, who doesn't properly salt a roadway because they want a barbecue lunch? You'd be surprised. It's like a pizza party at work, right? The kinds of things you might be willing to do to make it happen, So across the board, we see constant failures by the part of governments of all sizes in Kentucky to be able to properly manage snow, properly manage ice stores, or salt stores, properly deal with any of this following basic protocols. But, what do we expect when we have incompetent leaders that we elect? We get incompetent results. Speaking of ice, though, there's this group, Northern Kentucky Against Ice. Now, I made a funny post about this. This is funny. So I made this post. It says, "Hey, Kentucky, do you want to make sure criminal illegal immigrants can stay in your community? Well, now's your chance to fight back by blowing a whistle." Now, I posted that because this Northern Kentucky Against Ice group was had a graphic that I saw a few different places circulating about putting together whistle kits. That's right. Putting together whistle kits. So that way, if you see ice, you can blow a whistle. But they'd also been visiting fiscal court meetings and city council meetings because the local law enforcement in Northern Kentucky have been working with ice. Now, what does that mean, work with ice? What it means, and this is why you don't see these kinds of mass ice raids in Kentucky. You're not seeing the same drama that you see somewhere like Minnesota, is because what Minnesota and other sanctuary states and cities do is if they catch a illegal immigrant speeding, DUI, stealing, theft, whatever, if they arrest somebody and they're an illegal immigrant, they will not hold them for ICE to come pick up. For all the people talking about ICE is just targeting random family. No, that's not. How do you think you end up on ICE's radar in the first place? You think it's random? You think they're just dragnetting? Like, they want you to believe people are out here, stopping people asking for their papers because they're too brown or something. That's not what's happening at all. They talk about this. You'll see leftists talk about this, like, they're just stopping people in the street and blah, blah, blah. But I personally don't see any news stories about it. I follow a lot of leftist content, so I see these claims, and I follow it because I'm interested in what the other side's doing. I'm comfortable enough in my views that I can be exposed to other people's ideas without feeling threatened by them. Something a lot of people on the left can't say. But I see these claims, and then I go looking for any examples of this, and I can't find them. Because that's not what's going on. You're showing up on ICE's radar because you got into the system because you were arrested for something and they were alerted to it. Now, if local police and state police are not working with ICE, what that means is they will not hold that illegal immigrant for them to come pick up. So in Kentucky, how it works is if they catch an illegal immigrant, they will hold them for a few days for ICE to come get them rather than just releasing them back into the wild. But in Minnesota, what's going on and why ICE is there is because they do not hold them. They just release them back into the wild, and then ICE has to go hunt them down and arrest them. So definitionally, beyond the fact that all illegal immigrants are criminal because they're here illegally, when people say criminal illegal immigrants, what they're talking about is illegal immigrants committing crimes. The illegal immigrants currently being deported and the illegal immigrants are rounding up in places like Minnesota are illegal immigrants who've been arrested for something else before. So if you want them targeting the illegal immigrants committing crimes, that's like all ICE is doing. And in Kentucky, that's what they do. But our governments hold them. ICE comes and picks them up You're not seeing mass ICE raids. The only time you see mass ICE raids otherwise in Kentucky might be like an employer or something that has like a lot of illegal immigrants. But otherwise, it's just that they're coming to pick up people that local police are holding. But this Northern Kentucky against ICE has a real big problem with it. Now, I don't know what they expect to do with the whistles. They're going to stand outside the jails and just whistle at the ICE vehicles as they pull in, grab their guy, pull him out, or whistle at them at the courts as they pull in, grab their guy, and leave. Like, what's your plan with the whistles? You know, Minnesota, the whistling is about, oh, we're spotting ICE, so if you're an illegal immigrant, go hide. But these illegal immigrants are already detained in Kentucky, so what are you hoping to do with the whistle? So I posted this joke post about it where I was clearly joking. I said, hey, Kentucky, do you want to make sure criminal illegal immigrants can stay in your community? Well, now's your chance to fight back by blowing a whistle. That's right. Northern Kentucky against ICE has been thrown a fit at fiscal court and city council meetings because local law enforcement is willing to work with ICE to deport illegal immigrants who are breaking the law. And then I go on to list things you can do, like attending local court meetings to defend criminals from getting deported. It's clearly ridiculous. What they're actually defending is outright ridiculous, hence the parody, the sarcasm about it. This did go over some people's heads. Some people thought I was serious. I'm not. I was clearly joking. The fact that they could read that, though, and think I'm being serious tells you how far the left has certainly gone on this issue. Well, that's what we got time for today on the Andrew Cooperrider Show. Thank you all so much for joining me. I'll see you back here next week. I hope you have a great rest of your day. If you're listening to radio or TV, you want to catch any episodes you might have missed, you can visit theandrewshow.com. Once again, that's theandrewshow.com. Till next time, we'll be seeing you.